You both said your son acted strangely for weeks leading up to the murders, and you even set up an appointment for him to be evaluated. You should have done your job better, quicker. You should not be purchasing him knives. Your family deserves to suffer the way my family suffered.
On the evening of August the 15th, 2016, in Jupiter, Florida, the area literally became the scene of a horrific nightmare because a 19-year-old Florida State University student who was known online as Osty Frosty, or by news and outlets and community as the Cannibal Killer, barged in to an innocent couple's garage and committed one of the most shocking attacks in recent history. He brutally attacked 59-year-old John Stevens and 53-year-old Michelle Mishcon, stabbing them and beating them before sinking his teeth into Stevens' face, biting the flesh off his face as he deemed himself to be half man, half dog. When deputies arrived, they found Austin Harrouff growling like a dog several feet away from the victims and biting into Stevens' flesh. It took multiple officers, a canine unit, a stun gun, and several minutes to restrain him. This is one of those cases that is absolutely mind-blowing and also brings in that discussion regarding mental illness or, in some people's opinions, a narcissistic psychopathic killer. That is a constant discussion around this case. So let's talk about the perpetrator in this horrific case. His name's Austin Harrouff. He was 19 years of age at the time of these brutal attacks. He'd been attending Florida State University. He was born on December the 21st, 1996. He grew up in Jupiter, Florida. In fact, he lived there his whole life. And I've looked up Jupiter in Florida. It's basically a coastal town. It's located in northern Palm Beach County. It's along Florida's southeastern shoreline, and it's part of the Miami metropolitan area. Basically, it's got quite a lot of wealthy people. It's got those country club enclaves, and it, I imagine, feels like a suburban seaside town. It's actually described as being really family orientated. It's quiet, it's clean, middle class, it's safe, it's got a relatively low crime rate where violence is concerned. And you're gonna go there because you wanna swim in the gorgeous waters. You might wanna go to the beach clubs. You wanna go paddleboard with dolphins. Literally, as I'm saying that, I wish I was there. Now, he grew up in a loving family. He had a younger sister, and I would say his parents were middle upper class. His father's Dr. Wade Harrouff. He's a respected dentist in the area and obviously earns a packet. His mother's Mina. She's a homemaker, so she'd been present in his life as a mother and nurturer from the day he was born. But one of the issues that played out in his parents' relationship is they did have quite a fractious relationship. They were often arguing. They ended up getting divorced around 2013. So there is a level of instability during his teenage years. It's really difficult when you're hyper aware of your parents' problems, but it's something that's relatively common. You don't feel as isolated or abandoned these days if your parents are splitting up. You do expect some kind of negative discourse around the situation. And I think that young people are far more prepared for these kind of issues than they were 40 years ago. So I don't feel that we can put a great deal of blame on a really common experience to shape what happens next in this case. Now, he's really bright. He attended Suncoast Community High School in Riviera Beach, excelled really academically and athletically. So he's just one of those, at least at school, annoying all-rounders. And he worked hard. He was really dedicated. He actually enrolled in the school's rigorous International Baccalaureate program, the IB program. He stood out massively on the football field. He was a defensive lineman. He was also a really talented wrestler on the team. And that would have been partly to do with the fact that he was 6 foot tall and he weighed 200 pounds. So he would be very effective as an opponent. He was really disciplined. He was really driven. He maintained a 3.35 GPA in the school's competitive IB program. So he's somebody who stands out for all the right reasons. And he's not overconfident in those days. You know, he's considered by his peers quite shy, quite reserved. So there's a humility about him. He then graduates from Suncoast High School in 2015. Then he goes to Palm Beach College next. And reports also say that he trained to become a dental assistant in 2016, which I suppose if you've got a dad who's a super successful dentist, then you may as well train as a dental assistant because obviously there's a family business there. Now, he graduates successfully from his college and then he moves over to Florida State University. And again, he's very academic. He's studying biology and pre-exercise science. Now, at this university, he excels again as a student. He excels again as an athlete. But there is a transition. People who know him, they say he goes from being this kind of shy and humble introvert to becoming a really confident, sociable person. Now, that can be really positive because obviously you're developing and growing. And the thing about temperament is we're all born with a temperament, but it doesn't mean we can't manipulate that temperament. So I think that you can be quite a shy and introverted person and get to a point in your life psychologically, environmentally, socially, where you think to yourself, this isn't working for me in the way that I need it to work because at work, I need to be more outgoing if I'm going to get noticed by my boss, or I need to be more out there if I'm going to date a person that I can fall in love with and get married. You kind of have these moments where, in spite of your temperament, you think to yourself, I'm going to manipulate it slightly. You might go on some courses, do some self-development, read some books, but essentially you'll manifest some kind of change. It's not easy. Sometimes it's wearing a confidence cloak for a period of time until it becomes second nature because you've got used to that kind of environment and shift in your social experience. But you can do it. And I suppose at university, he is getting older. He's coming out of the awkward teen stage of being like 13 to 16, and he's successful. So he's probably getting a lot of positive feedback. And because of that, it's likely that he is indeed becoming a more extrovert individual compared to who he had been before. But also, when you get to university, I don't know, there just seems to be quite a lot of opportunities to maybe take some recreational drugs here and there. I'm not saying he was doing that, but what I've noticed is there are a lot of people I grew up with who were not confident at all. And then they went to university and they came across drugs like cocaine, for example. And then suddenly they went from being the quietest person at the party to a really confident, loud person at a party. And if you didn't know that that was because they spent 5 minutes in the toilets sniffing something up their nose and changing their temperament in that way, you would have met them in that way. And actually the interesting thing there is that when you meet somebody that way, you believe that's who they are, and then it reinforces that person's belief of who they are. So I'm not saying that was happening. I'm saying that certainly seems to be a common factor and thread for a lot of individuals who start experimenting when they go to university. Now, his coaches, they said that his work was brilliant. He had a great work ethic. He had great physical strength, which is obviously important when you're athletic. And they loved his competitiveness. He was somebody who was really good at managing the stress of competing. And apparently wrestling was really important to him. And he felt that that offered him a sense of connection, community, of purpose, of drive. Also, he pledged to Alpha Delta Phi fraternity. Again, we're seeing money here play out, aren't we? Because fraternities tend to mean that you come from particular households, and usually there's some kind of historic experience of your parents or grandparents being in the fraternity too. But it demonstrates that he does have a very blessed upbringing to some degree. And there's a quote which is, early on in high school, he was a very quiet kid. As he shifted and met different types of people, maybe he wasn't prepared to handle that type of attention. So that's one of his classmates who said that. So this shift from being considered introvert to extrovert, maybe it put some pressures on him. The fact that he seemed to change personality-wise, and that some of those changes people don't believe were that positive, could have been because of his new experiences, or it could be that he's made an absolute challenge to himself to actually become more confident because he thinks it's going to work for him better. And that confidence does work for him because he gets leadership on the wrestling team, he gets leadership on the weightlifting circuit, he earns district level recognition, so a lot of reinforcement. And at this point, he becomes quite invested in physical performance and to some degree sharing that physical performance as well. He wants others to benefit. When it comes down to his teachers, they tend to describe him more in that quiet but focused way, just being somebody who excelled academically but was really polite all the time. So maybe he wears different masks in different moments. Now, during his later teenage years, one thing that changes about him is he goes from being quite a clean liver to actually gaining some pretty bad habits. But again, when you're a teenager, particularly if you go to university, you do want to experience what you think being a grown-up is like. And often we think grown-ups are grown-up because they have access to things that we're not allowed when we're kids, like alcohol. So he does drink a lot. He does use drugs. It's specifically marijuana. It does apparently state in the research that I've done that he did occasionally claim to hear voices that weren't there on occasions. Now, if you think about schizophrenia, for example, or schizoid personality disorder, what we do know is there are some links that are believed to exist between early marijuana use in young boys and the development of these issues later down the line. Now, of course, I'm not saying for 1 minute that people who smoke marijuana are going to develop things like schizophrenia. Clearly, that makes no sense whatsoever. But if you have a predisposition for these kind of issues, and then you are put through a certain amount of stress, and then you have a proclivity for actually smoking cannabis, these can combine to cause these fractures in the psychological foundation that manifest more greatly because of using substances and because of those other factors playing into life. So the very fact that he has heard voices early on, that is worrying because it does suggest the potential for psychosis. And I've worked with so many young people that when they talk to me about the voices, it's really important to understand what kind of voice is going on. Because of course, we all have the loud critical voice in our head, don't we? Not everyone has it. There are a group of people out there, percentage-wise, who don't actually hear voices in their head at all, as in they don't listen to themselves and talk to themselves brain-wise in a way where they can actually acknowledge it. Whereas somebody like myself, I have different accents. I'm not even joking. My voices in my head have lots of different accents. You know, I chat to myself all the time. That's how I work emotionally. And there's nothing wrong with it because those voices are my voices. I'm aware they are my voices. I'm aware I'm giving them accents and they are not distinct to my personality. They are part of my personality. But certainly when people start to have these experiences where they feel that somebody's talking to them behind them or at the center of their brain in a way that doesn't feel like they are connected to them, that is worrying. And whenever I've worked with individuals, that's one of the things that we have to be distinct about. What are these voices? Where are they coming from? Is it you? Are you aware of it? Or is it feeling like there is a third party involved? And it feels like he was talking about the voices feeling very distinct from himself. And this also needs to be noted. He admits to this after he's carried out the crime. Now, some people will say, well, that's very convenient. But I'm going to say from the get-go, I don't think it is convenience in this case. I think it fits in with his actions, which we'll discuss later on. Now, one of the things that he uses to cope during his teenage years are journal entries. Now, these entries, they actually get used in evidence against him. So he does things like write song and rap lyrics. He writes about his mental struggles, says he's got depression, says he's got anxiety. And there are examples like this. Do you know what it feels like to be so afraid to speak? Becoming a bully because all the bullies bullied me. Man, I just wanted to be accepted. The anxiety I feel inside feels like I internally bleed. Born a troublemaking kid, made every single teacher flip their lid. He also wrote about the Renaissance, Picasso, and nuclear weapons while describing himself as happy, shy, nice, and positive. So some extremes in his feelings and the way he describes his feelings, also very distinct from his personal experience. I mean, what he's talking about there doesn't sound like his experience of school, but that doesn't mean that he can't empathize with those individuals that went through those things at school. Now, later research, which is when they look at his internet history, so this is after he commits the crime, there are some really concerning entries on Google. So, how to sell your soul to the devil. How do I let God into my life? How to contact Oprah Winfrey. I think that's probably the most disturbing entry. No, I'm joking. Sorry, inappropriate, just at the end of the day. How to contact Oprah Winfrey. Well, she's got a pretty big network. I'm pretty sure if your story's dramatic enough, she'll speak to you. But the Oprah Winfrey Show, it is synonymous with history, isn't it? Let's be honest. When I was really little, she had a show and she's still massively successful now, isn't she? But she tends to cover topics that are quite sensationalist and some would say at times a little bit on the exploitative level. But the very fact that he's kind of talking about wanting to contact her and God and the devil, etc., that does suggest that there is some kind of mental decline occurring during those moments. I'm not saying that you have to be in mental decline to contact Oprah Winfrey before anybody starts ranting at me. I'm just saying that there is a chaos to some of those searches, if that makes sense. Now, around March of 2016, he decides that he might want to become a YouTube influencer, which again makes absolute sense. A lot of young people see that that's an opportunity as a side hustle, and actually for some individuals it becomes your lifestyle. His actual account name on that particular platform was A Frost. Actually, his old account is still there, so you can actually still see his videos. So he posts fitness videos, he posts advice vlogs, he posts some of the music that he made, which is for a particular type of ear, certainly not for somebody like myself. And I guess he's got kind of quite a goofy, likable persona on those videos. Now his bio reads, "This, that, fuck around music y'all been hearing about. I've got a psycho side and a normal side. I've lost my mind, help me find it." Now you can take that literal, or you can just acknowledge that he's trying to create an impact, because it's quite hard creating a biography. You want to seem cool, you want to seem interesting, but sometimes when your life has maybe given you opportunities and privilege, it's hard to do that in a way that doesn't sound a little bit weird or cheesy. Another thing that he posted online were vlogs of him going out on boat trips with his dad. And there is something a little bit uncomfortable sometimes about his videos. Sometimes he's a little bit strange, but I don't think you could ever notice something that gave you a big red flag about what's going to come. Genuinely, there is nothing so notable that makes you think this guy's going to end up killing people. He seems like a normal type of teenager. You know, I'm not saying absolutely box standard, because his lifestyle's different, his experiences are different, but he's normal-ish. He's a goofy guy. He loves music, he loves the gym. To all intents and purposes, you're probably seeing somebody that you'd be quite envious of to some degree. So essentially, that's the background that we have on our perpetrator. Now, in the months leading up to the crime I'm going to talk about, there is a shift in the way that he acts. So first of all, he becomes super generous, gives away personal possessions to people, doesn't actually charge them any money. But in tandem to this, he starts to become more paranoid. So he's barely able to sleep. He's actually claiming to be waking up frozen with a demon stood over him. Now, that could be different things. So the most obvious one that we can draw down when he's saying that he's got a demon stood over him and he's frozen is sleep paralysis. My husband suffers from sleep paralysis. Believe me, it's terrifying for an individual to experience that, because he believes that he is fully awake and he can see absolutely everything in Technicolor, but actually his sleep cycle is still going on. So it's like he's in a living, waking nightmare while sleeping, if that makes sense. And he screams, but it's a muffled scream because he's caught in that nightmare state. And it's this really odd sleep-wake state that people genuinely feel is 100% real. And often people who suffer from sleep paralysis feel like there are demons or dark figures or aliens around them. They tell a very, very similar story. It's like a nightmare, but it feels utterly connected to reality. But it could also be something to do with psychosis, because people who are suffering from psychosis often have hallucinations, and those hallucinations are incredibly scary. And there's actually a video. Now, it's not being serious in this video, but it does show that he's got quite manic behaviour. So there is definitely something going on psychologically with him. Now, 3 days before the actual crime plays out, his dental patients who he's working with, they actually said that his behaviour became really strange and really paranoid. So he's randomly talking to them about God. He was telling his patients he's full of love and peace and joy. Actually, he starts praying during the dental surgery, kind of as if it's a holy ritual. Let me tell you, if my dentist starts praying whilst they're doing some surgery on me, I am vacating the premises. I don't like going to the dentist, nothing against my dentist, it's very nice, I just don't like it. So the idea that they'd need to pray whilst they were doing something on my teeth wouldn't keep me in that seat. I would literally be running out with whatever they'd shoved in my mouth and just getting in my car and driving home. But he's basically telling them that there were signs of God inside every song on the radio. Understandably, the patients found that really strange. They found it really confusing, but they don't report it. So they only talk about this after the murders that I'm going to talk about play out. Now, I appreciate why, because it's really awkward. You don't want to question people who are professionals. You see them as an authority figure in many ways, and also you just hope that you're getting things wrong. It's just a little bit of eccentric behavior. But actually, this is why it's really important that if you do kind of witness this kind of behavior where it looks like somebody's going into a mental spiral, you do actually talk about it. You do confront the issue, because this case that I'm going to talk about is a life or death issue. And people should always react to the warning signs, because that's how you can prevent these kind of tragedies playing out. Now, the same night after he returns home from dental surgery, at this point he claims that he's, quote, seen the devil. Now, I know a lot of you will understand psychotic breaks, you'll understand what psychosis is, and you'll understand just how terrifying it is for the individual who's experiencing it. But just in case people haven't had experience of psychosis or don't fully understand it, I'll describe it. Imagine watching me now. Imagine, in fact, being in the room with me now and you can smell my perfume, you can see me talking, you can feel my presence, and it feels 100% absolutely real. That's psychosis. When you're having a psychotic break, you have auditory, you can have the visual, you can have scent-based hallucinations, and it is impossible to tell the person who is dealing with that very real experience that it's not real, because it's as real as I am to you now, to them. When my father dealt with psychosis that led to his suicide, it was very much that he absolutely fully believed everything that he was seeing, feeling, hearing, and smelling, even when there was nothing there that I could see or anybody else could see. And so when you think you've seen the devil, you have seen the devil. It's real to you. And it's really challenging for people to wrap their heads around that, because if you've never experienced it or gone anywhere near that kind of reality, it feels almost impossible to apply that logic, that you can see things that aren't there, that you can feel things that aren't there. But believe me, you can and you do. And it's absolutely breathtakingly terrifying for the individuals who experience it. And also it's alienating, because if you're telling somebody you've seen the devil, or that you're seeing the devil or hearing them, etc., and that person is saying, well, they're not there, then it makes you paranoid that that person is lying, because it's there. So can you see how that mental interplay and that twisting of reality and that experience that you're having versus the experience that other people are having can make the people who are going through it feel even more paranoid, because it's like, it's obviously there, I'm looking at it. That's why psychosis is such a challenging thing to experience. Now, because he's gone through this experience, he ends up flushing all these drugs down the toilet because he's seen this, and he's really scared. Goes and stays over at a friend's house that night. So he's obviously trying to get some support. And he actually makes his last YouTube video on his channel at that point. This is when he's talking about the fact that he doesn't follow other bodybuilders. He also says he doesn't use drugs. And I guess that's because he's just flushed them all away. But it also, again, tells of chaos. On one hand, he's seeing the devil. On the other hand, he's doing a YouTube video sharing his story. Now, this is 2 days before the murder. We also hear that he starts telling friends and family that he's got this really special connection with animals. He says he understands them and that these animals will give him their special powers. Again, this is not normal speak. This suggests mental spiraling and decline. And it also suggests that he's having interactions in his own mind with animals. So even though it doesn't make sense to people, because how can he possibly be talking to animals and understanding them, at the end of the day, he will believe that if he's going through some kind of psychotic break. But also it tells us how challenging it is to challenge people in these situations. Because if you've got an experience with a human being and you get on really well with them, and then they turn up and they're speaking in ways that make you feel uncomfortable, it's quite difficult to say to them, I think something is going on with you. You don't want to offend them, you don't want to get it wrong, and that risk of offending often plays into why people get so seriously sick, because people don't intervene at a point where they can be helped, because they basically don't want to upset them. And I can literally go back to the moment I knew my father was having a really serious episode of psychosis. He was sat at the table. I'd bought a curry for my family, as we did very often on a Sunday when they came over. And he just suddenly looked at me and he went, I don't know why you're doing this, Emma. And I looked at him and I said, doing what, Dad? And he said, you know exactly what you're doing. And I can remember feeling like my stomach had fell through the floor because I knew it was happening. And in that moment, obviously I intervened, and unfortunately it never worked out that the intervention could have been early enough because we still lost Dad. But what I'm saying is it's really scary for them, and they believe things that no one else can believe because you're not experiencing it, but it's very real to them. So he believes he's got these special powers. People aren't really challenging him on this. And I'm not blaming those people, by the way. I'm just acknowledging and empathizing with the reasons why they don't. Now, the next morning, there were reports that he was seen in a restaurant. He looked really agitated. He was basically drinking some tap water, but he's saying that he believes that the tap water is a fountain of youth. He believed it was speaking to him. A friend actually picked him up later on in the day to give him a lift somewhere. That friend drove a Dodge pickup truck. Now, the thing about the Dodge pickup truck is it's got that ram that's actually a motif on it. So he thought he was seeing the devil staring him down when he sees the logo of the ram on the side of the car. And like I said, people who are going through psychotic episodes, they will pick out specific things and believe there is meaning behind them because it colludes with the paranoia and suspicion that they have, and also with some of the visual hallucinations that they're experiencing. Now, that very same night, his younger sister said that he actually asked her if he could sleep on the floor of her bedroom. So he's looking for that safety. He's scared. She said he was struggling to sleep. He was holding onto the dog as if he wanted protection. He actually walked that dog the following day. And then during that walk, he starts acting in a very strange way. So he begins running. And he said that during this episode, he just felt superhuman. He said he felt like he had dog spirits inside him. It was making him really strong, really fast. And I suppose that also creates that connection with what he's talking about, where he's got special connection with the animals and they're giving him superpowers. He also apparently said he felt half dog, half man. Now, the same day that he's going through these feelings, he attends a gun show with his dad. At that gun show, he felt apparent extreme paranoia. This is not unusual. Imagine you are in a completely different state of mind. You are going through kind of a break with reality, and you are looking around and there are guns everywhere, which is a hostile environment if you're going through a psychotic break anyway. And there are people wanting your business. They're going to be looking at you, checking you out because, hey, come and buy a gun off me. But you're internalizing that as you are very distinct and different from these people, and everyone is looking at you, and you feel deeply paranoid and suspicious about what their intentions are. That would be the mindset that he was experiencing during that particular process. Now, his dad, obviously, he can see his son's really tense, and he eases him and basically says, look, let's go and look at the machete section, the knife section instead. But again, his dad probably isn't processing that his son might be seriously mentally unwell. Now, during this particular episode, apparently he starts thinking to himself, what would happen if I ate a snake? So he starts having this recurring loop thought, which is if he eats the snake, it's going to give him power over the devil. So again, this idea that he needs to have power over the devil, on one level making him superhuman, actually a god, because if you have power over the devil, you'd have to be a god, but equally speaking to a fear that he has that the devil could have power over him, and he wants to protect himself from that. Now, the day that this horrific crime plays out is August the 15th, 2016. Bear in mind, we know he's claimed to have dog spirits inside him. Now he's saying to himself that the dogs are telling him he's got to wear his Michael Vick jersey. And when he puts that jersey on, apparently he felt invincible. Again, in psychotic episodes, imagine superhuman strength. Imagine not feeling pain. These are things that often play out when you're having a psychotic break. You are not in your right mind, but you're also not in your normal physical state. My father, when he thought people were trying to kidnap him, ran around the garden. My husband and my brother, who are very strong men, were both trying to hold him back. It took another 3 police officers and 3 paramedics to subdue him. And then they needed to load him with 3 sedative shots. It could have killed him. They had to monitor his breathing because he was so sedated in the end. But that took a lot of time. And when those sedatives went into him, the first one didn't work, the second one didn't work. And when they nearly killed him, it worked. That's how superhuman and powerful he felt, and he was in his 70s. So this is not abnormal at all, to feel this superhuman strength in these moments. And when he's got this shirt on, apparently he felt like the devil couldn't touch him. Now, even though these thoughts are clearly very odd, one of the things that people said about his behaviour was it wasn't overly erratic at the start of the day. But again, you've always got a bias where you believe things are going to be okay with people that you love and care about. So you're not always aware of the obvious signs, even the nuances in behaviour that change, because you just bought into this belief it'll be okay. But he did go to a party. He went to another party, So he actually went to the beach, and then he did actually head to a party with his paternity friends. So he's obviously hanging out with people, trying to distract himself, but there are things going on in his mind. Now, after he's done that, he goes for a meal with his parents at Duffy's. But during the meal, there's an argument. We don't know absolutely what that argument is about, but I would imagine his mindset is probably problematic and could be conflictual. He then leaves the meal. He heads over to his mother's house. She then finds him there drinking a bottle of cooking oil, which is really strange and very disconcerting for any parent. She takes the bottle of oil off him, and then she drives him back to the restaurant that they'd actually been eating at, but he doesn't stay very long and he leaves again. Now, later that evening, apparently he said that the world stopped feeling real. He said time for him had slowed down. He felt like the Grim Reaper, and he's hearing voices. Then he starts running. He says he's following the stars back home. So he walks, runs several miles, in fact. He takes off some of his clothes. He gets rid of his phone, his wallet, his ID. Now, during this particular episode, he says he saw a dark figure, and that dark figure scares him. And bear in mind, he's already had the potential sleep paralysis or psychotic break during the night, and he'd woken up to dark figures, so that really disturbs him. Now, it's around 9 p.m. at this point. And because he was so concerned about these dark figures and this dark figure he's now seen again, he decides that the best way of managing this is to basically run for the first source of light he sees, because he's going to feel safe if it's in the light. Now, the problem is that that light isn't heavenly. That light isn't safety. That light is just an open garage. And the figure inside is just somebody who's sat in that open garage, not wanting to do him any harm at all. He just happens to be present whilst this particular individual is struggling with his mental health. That garage is a garage of married couple John Stevens and Michelle Mishcon. Now, one of the things that they happened to do pretty much every evening was sit in the garage together, just enjoying each other's company, people watching. John was 59, Michelle was just 53. They had a lovely 3-bedroomed home. Life was good. And suddenly, out of the dark, everything they've built, the relationship that they love, the connection that they have is going to be destroyed in an instant because of what is going on in this perpetrator's mind. He attacks the first figure that he sees, that's Michelle. He stabs her. At this point, he sees John. Now, he claims that this is the moment where he's literally got no recollection from. He attacks both of these individuals, and he attacks them in the most extreme and violent and gruesome assault. The most accurate recall of the events have to come from the neighbours who actually discovered the scene, because unfortunately, neither of our victims make it. Now, they come across this dimly lit garage, and he's just taken by an image that he notices. It's something that just kind of stands out. You can see this guy, he believes is a tall guy hunched over John. Now, at this point, he isn't attacking John anymore, but he's doing something even more disturbing. I mean, it doesn't even seem to make sense that I can say a sentence like that. He's attacked this guy horrifically, but he's doing something more disturbing, but he really is. Austin's hunched over John. He's literally eating his face. Apparently he looked like a zombie. Austin was tearing into his flesh with his teeth in the most savage of ways. That neighbour, obviously after witnessing this horrific scene, is so brave, rushes to intervene, wants to help John. Now Austin attacks the neighbour, stabs him in the back as he tries to escape. Fortunately, he does manage to get away, but this guy sustains multiple injuries. Isn't that incredible? The bravery they show, desperately trying to help John. Now, they immediately call 911, gets to his own home and alerts the authorities. And here he can actually be heard in his home telling 911 about what he's seen, about the injuries that he also has personally accumulated. The police, the paramedics, they arrive. I bet they couldn't even imagine that this was real. It seems like a sick joke. And then when they arrive, it's exactly as they've been told. They see the same sight that the neighbour has just reported. A white Hispanic male, around 6 foot tall, wearing shorts and a t-shirt, hunched over John Stevens, eating his face. In fact, when they arrived, Austin was still biting chunks of flesh from Stevens' face, and he was making animal-like noises. The police officer at this point, understandably, reaches for the taser, orders him to stop, says, "Surrender yourself," didn't even flinch. Didn't even acknowledge that the officer was there. So the officer releases a taser at him. He doesn't react. Even as the electric current goes through his body, he does not react. And that's why I'm putting across what happened to my dad, so you understand. You understand that this is not somebody in a natural human state. The things going on physiologically and psychologically, emotionally in that moment are so profound, are so intense, that even when you shoot a taser at them and it rips through their body, there's no reaction. At this point, they try to grab him, but he's just impossibly strong. That officer had to literally flee the scene, had to wait for backup to arrive. And then another deputy and a dog, a police dog, arrives at the scene. Even with 2 officers, trained officers, and a dog, they still struggle to subdue Austin. Eventually, they do manage to. They arrest him, but this is after an intense struggle. The observers who actually saw this play out said that Austin was incoherent, he was rambling, and he was literally covered in blood. Now, at this point, he's arrested, taken into custody. John is really sadly pronounced dead at the scene. Michelle's also found dead at the scene. One of the things that they discovered on Michelle's body is that she had sustained obvious serious injuries that led to death, but she tried to defend her husband and she wanted to escape the attack herself, so she got very bad defensive injuries. When they looked at the bodies of both victims, it was obvious that they had stab wounds, lacerations, also blunt force trauma. At this point, the police obviously seal off the scene for investigation. One of the things that they recognised early on in the case was there was no evidence that Austin knew or had any connections with either of them. It was just an entirely random choice of killing. It just came from nowhere. It was unprovoked. I mean, that's one of the things that kind of keeps you up at night sometimes, isn't it? The idea that you can just be doing something totally ordinary and then the extraordinarily evil thing happens to you because of another person's actions. Now, obviously, they've got the guy. They know that Austin is the suspect and they know that he's responsible for the barbaric attack. Yes, they have to prove it like they always have to, but it's going to be obviously him because he's the only one present. He was literally eating the face of one of the victims. One of the officers said it was one of the most gruesome crime scenes we've ever seen. This was a completely unprovoked and savage attack. That was Sheriff William Snyder who said that. Also, I think it's really important to just take a moment to talk about who the victims were because these were incredibly lovely humans. John Stevens was just 59 years of age when he was murdered. Friends and family described him as really warm, as really generous, as a really laid-back guy. He just loved spending time outdoors. He really liked being out in the water and by the water. And John had a background in business and real estate, and he was well known in the neighborhood because he was really friendly. He was really willing to help you out. And according to relatives, he just loved working on projects around the house. He really enjoyed relaxing in that fateful garage. It was kind of a casual gathering spot. It wasn't like your normal garage. It had a TV, it had comfy chairs. Friends would stop by, they'd share a drink with them, have a conversation. And it's really ironic and sad that that's also the place where his life would end. Then his partner, Michelle Mishcon, she was only 53. She'd been married to John for nearly 2 decades. She was absolutely beloved by her family and friends. She was somebody who was really outgoing. She had a really great spirit. She was incredibly warm. Apparently she had a deep devotion to her children from a prior marriage. She was described as somebody who literally never hesitated. She would lend you a hand whenever you needed it. She'd offer support to you, whether you were a close friend or neighbour or just somebody who needed help. And her loved ones said that she was somebody who just brought a really big sense of light and fun wherever she went. It's just devastating to imagine that their lives ended in such an unprovoked and also really unusually brutal attack. Now, on the evening of the attack, they had just been spending time together in the garage. They had the doors open. That's what they often did. It meant that people could come in and have a chat. And it's this really simple, peaceful routine, this lovely routine. You know, this is 2 decades of marriage and they're still there. Sharing space, sharing time, sharing conversation with each other in the evening, just enjoying that routine of peace and tranquility and connection. Bear in mind, imagine being the family of this couple. Can you imagine getting that call? I mean, it's terrible to lose anybody in any circumstance. Of course it is, natural or unnatural. But when you're talking about a traumatic murder of this propensity, of this magnitude, it's going to stain your conscience for the rest of your existence. And they are absolutely devastated by the loss. They were outraged also. Michelle's sister actually said they were good people. They were just sitting in the garage, just enjoying their evening. And she's right. I mean, shouldn't that just be something we can all take for granted? We can just sit in our garage, staring out at our society and community and believe that we're safe in that situation. Michelle's sister's entirely correct. They should have been able to do that. The neighborhood was obviously traumatized. Things like that do not happen anywhere on the whole, but certainly not in this middle upper class environment. And these two have been remembered by the whole community as people who were just unbelievably loving and community minded. Now, bear in mind, when Austin is initially arrested, he can't go to prison immediately. So he needs to actually be put into hospital for almost 2 months. He's at St. Mary's Medical Center in West Palm Beach. He was under armed guard the entire time. Bear in mind, he has been severely injured when he's arrested. So he'd actually drank toxic household substances. So again, that speaks of somebody who's not in their right mind. That's incredibly dangerous, incredibly painful, and often fatal. Also, he had injuries from the taser. He had injuries from the dog. But all of this still doesn't speak to why he's actually committed a crime. They don't understand it. This seems so left field for a boy who's come from such an amazing family. So they have to investigate, of course, what caused him to kill that couple. Now, the same night after the murders play out, they bring his parents in to be questioned. They want to get some more insight about Austin's behavior. I can't even begin to imagine how his parents felt in that moment. There is no way they could have predicted this. I mean, this is not the kind of family who they would typically believe it could happen to, and yet it's happened to them. Now, they question them on whether he'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia, whether there's a family history of it, because sometimes you will see that there is a pattern in genetic experience. And when you think about schizophrenia, it really is a brain disease. So we do look for those kind of links, but they can't come forth with anything that's significant. They also asked, what's his drug use like? Has he taken recreational drugs? His mother said, look, he uses marijuana, but I'm not aware that he used it on that day. They also said, tell us about his personality, tell us about his childhood. Now, his dad said that there had been recent issues with insomnia. He couldn't sleep. Also, his dad said, look, I tried to give him a Valium. He threw it on the floor. He said, I will not be controlled by you again. That's a massive red flag. When somebody does that, it does give you an insight that there is a spiral within the mental health. And he said that after he'd done that, Austin had actually jumped on the bonnet of his car and dented the car. So again, very atypical behaviour. Now, initially, when the police were actually investigating, they thought, listen, there's got to be some kind of synthetic drugs in his system, like flakka or bath salts, because they are actually known for inducing delusions and violent outbursts. So they immediately order toxicology tests. They want to check out his blood work. The FBI is brought in to an advanced screening because there are some obscure psychoactive substances that they need specialist help with. They did several rounds of this testing. No bath salts, no flakka, no LSD, no methamphetamine, no common street drugs at all were found in Austin's system. Yeah, THC and alcohol were found, but even they weren't at levels that were considered intoxicating. They did discover the corrosive chemical in the stomach, but they think that that came from a substance that he found in the garage when he carried out the killings. Now, that same chemical that caused internal damage meant that obviously that was why he stayed in hospital for quite a long time, aside from his mental health issues. Now, during the investigation, one of the things that the police had to do was to look at his digital footprint. Is there any evidence that he was intending to murder people? What kind of history are in his searches? So they look at his social media accounts, look at his YouTube videos, look at his writings, and with respect, they do discover some really troubling signs. So Austin had posted about believing he was half dog, half man, talking about feeling immortal. He also referenced concepts like white horse purity and divine punishment. So this does kind of suggest there is something going on a deeper level in Austin's mindset. When it came down to the autopsies, obviously they confirmed sharp force trauma, blunt force injuries, also just those extensive bite marks actually on both victims, especially John Stevens. And the investigation went on for weeks and weeks. Police interviewed witnesses. This included Austin's parents and friends. Now, one of the most notable testimonies came from his dad. And his dad said he believed his son may have been poisoned or suffered some kind of psychotic break brought on by stress, substance, or untreated mental illness. I think that's a fair assessment by his father. Now, like I said, Austin remained hospitalised and also unresponsive for a long time. This is whilst the investigation is going on. He's under constant guard, but is not able to interact. Now, once he was medically stable, at that point, he was officially arrested on October the 3rd, 2016. So that's about 7 weeks after the murders. He told the doctors he really didn't remember the attack. I will say, during his interviews, he's crying, he's expressing guilt. He's saying he really doesn't understand what happened. And I know that some people will question that authenticity. I happen to believe that he's telling the truth. He ends up getting charged with 2 counts of murder, 1 for John, 1 for Michelle. Also, of course, 1 count of attempted murder for the neighbour. Now, because this crime was considered particularly heinous, and indeed it was particularly heinous, prosecutors actually initially planned to seek life in prison or even the death penalty. But Austin's defence team rightfully focused on his mental state. Also discussed the preceding events leading up to the murders. They said, look, he was legally insane at the time. They brought in forensic psychologists who confirmed absolutely he was suffering from severe case of mental illness. They actually noted he was dealing with a psychotic episode, that he had mood and thought disorder, he had delusions, he had hallucinations, he had disorganized thinking, and they said that during the attack, he would not have known the difference between right or wrong. Now, that absolutely meets the very hard to apply definition of insanity in Florida. They also said, listen, there is no way he was faking or exaggerating his symptoms. Now, the state attorney's office determined that therefore it would be unethical to proceed with a death penalty trial against someone who met Florida's legal criteria for insanity, and that's correct. I mean, you can't put somebody to death who didn't know what they were doing. That would be a heinous blot on the landscape of any state. Now, the case and the trial was infuriatingly for the family and frustratingly for the family of the victims delayed repeatedly. So that's because of the mental health evaluations, that's the gathering of evidence, of course, but then the COVID pandemic, the gift that keeps giving where these cases are concerned, that, of course, caused loads of court backlogs. So Austin ends up remaining in custody at the Martin County Jail. At this point, he was isolated. He's also heavily monitored. They also discovered during the investigation text messages and internet search history, which did actually detail that he had been involved with long-term drug use. So he was somebody who regularly used drugs like cannabis, also things like psilocybins and mushrooms. In fact, he tried to get mushrooms off a friend just 6 days before he was arrested. Again, when people are struggling with their mental health, I will say this, often they'll turn to self-medication. So they'll be struggling with voices, they'll drink to try to block them out, or they'll smoke weed to try to counter them. This is not unusual. Also, people who are looking to change their mindset to feel better, they'll often look at hallucinogenics, for example, because they're already dealing with these kind of breaks in their mindset. So finding things that kind of parallel that is not uncommon. And there are texts sent to friends saying things like, I literally blacked out while talking to you. I blacked out. I lost my hat, my shoes, my shirt. Blacked out last night, and I texted Sarah. I have no idea why. Sorry, I'm asking a lot of questions. I blacked out at like 8 o'clock. So these are all repeated suggestions that he genuinely is enduring these kind of breaks from reality. Now, the case eventually came to a conclusion in November 2022. He did plead guilty by reason of insanity, and it was accepted by the judge. So that obviously means that instead of going to a prison, he's been admitted to a secure psychiatric facility for an indefinite period. In fact, that period they believe is going to be for the rest of his life. So they don't think he's ever going to walk freely. I mean, a doctor and a judge could deem him no longer a threat to society, but the state really does not believe that's a possibility. I will tell you that a lot of people were furious at that actual sentence. In fact, Carmen, who is Michelle's sister, she said, you are not a victim of mental illness. You are a narcissistic, cold-blooded murderer, and I will never forgive you. I totally understand her point of view. I have said, I believe he was dealing with a psychotic break, but let me tell you, if somebody killed my sister, I probably wouldn't find the empathy and compassion for them, even in the absolute clarity of other people's evidence suggesting that this individual was really, really delusional. It's my sister. You killed her. I ain't going to forgive you. And I'm not even going to probably give the good grace of believing those reports because my pain is too big. So I totally connect with it. I'm just coming from my professional insight, having worked with this area, and also my personal insight, having lost my dad to this particular disease. He murdered himself. He didn't murder others. But again, it tells you of delusions that people experience. I do believe that this guy was really mentally unwell. Now, they do release calls from his jailhouse, and when he was in the jailhouse, he was talking about the fact it was the hardest thing he'd ever been through, that he was struggling to adjust. Of course, if you're mentally ill and in prison, that is going to be very chaotic for you. And it also demonstrates that there is a level of him understanding that he should be in prison, but equally emotionally not feeling a connection with that environment because his life has been so distinct. Now, he did appear on the Dr. Phil show shortly after the murder. So he's not present, obviously he's in prison, but during that interview he's expressing his regret, he's crying. And I guess one of the things we can say is the fact that he does get very upset, the fact that he does show guilt, the fact that he does take accountability, responsibility for the killings, albeit that he doesn't necessarily remember doing it. He understands his punishment, and he obviously wants people to understand that he understands that. But this is also somebody who gets put in jail and no doubt will have evaluations and psychiatric reports, as we know because the forensic psychologists, etc., brought those to court. So he will also be medicated. And medication can be miraculous for people who suffer from psychosis. It cannot always be. Certainly there are individuals who don't get any benefit from things like antipsychotics, but there are individuals who massively do. And the fact that he's reflective, okay, he's not saying that he remembers what he did, but then psychotic breaks you rarely do. It feels obviously more like a nightmare on reflection than it does a reality. So you can see that there is an understanding. There is a reflective exercise there going on in his brain where he can recognize and condemn his actions. And this is one of those cases where I feel like everyone loses. I mean, you have these amazing victims who were incredible human beings who've lost their lives in the most torturous of ways. Literally the most torturous of ways. You have Austin's family who are broken by this. Their child carried out these brutal murders. And you have a community who've lost people of great meaning. And Austin, this kid who was going to succeed in so many different ways, athletically, academically, he's never going to probably walk freely because he will be considered a danger to society. So he's going to spend the rest of his life in a secure mental health facility. No one in any way, shape or form in this story has anything positive come out of it, if that makes sense. I suppose we could say that society is safer because Austin won't have the capacity to kill again, but so much potential lost. And everyone will have a different idea of whether the sentence befits the crime. I personally believe that life locked up in a secure unit or a prison kind of is an equivalent. And he, over those years, will have many years to reflect on that fateful night where he stole the lives of 2 people in the most horrendous of ways. But his life is over to some degree as well. It's one of those tales that reminds us that we have to risk offending. If you see somebody who's spiraling mentally, you need to challenge them. You need to get help for them. Because even though this is an extreme case and this person fundamentally harmed other people, we do know that lots of individuals who go through psychotic breaks actually harm themselves. So intervention matters. I'm not saying it's your responsibility. I'm saying that you have to take some responsibility, because if we all do that, maybe outcomes like this will no longer exist. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, guys. As ever, look after yourself. And I appreciate that I've brought in my own story, but I'm trying to do that just to highlight the reality of what it's like dealing with psychosis. I'm not trying to teach grandma to suck eggs or make it all about me. I just want to express a real understanding of this core subject because I lived it. See you again next time, guys. Be safe.